The auditorium seemed to freeze in time. The laughter that had once echoed from the back rows vanished, replaced by a silence so sharp it could cut glass. All eyes turned to the group of 6 men now standing shoulder to shoulder with Michael, their presence radiating something that couldn't be faked: authority, brotherhood, and an unshakable sense of respect. They weren't in uniform, but they didn't need to be. The way they carried themselves said everything. One of them, a tall, broad man with a scar running across his jaw, stepped forward. "Did I hear someone disrespect my brother?" His voice rumbled like distant thunder, calm but filled with a dangerous weight. The teenager stiffened. The boy who had mocked Michael most stood frozen, his smirk long gone. He glanced at his friends for support, but they were already backing away, their bravado collapsing under the sheer force of the moment. The crowd of parents and students leaned in, sensing that something monumental was about to unfold. Michael didn't move. He simply stood in the center of it all, his eyes steady, his breathing calm, as his brothers closed ranks around him. For years he had carried the burden of silence, swallowing his pain and letting the world misunderstand him. But today felt different. Today, the truth had witnesses. Another Marine, shorter but stocky with eyes that burned like fire, pointed directly at the boy. "You think you're funny mocking a man like him? You have no idea who you're standing in front of. This man saved lives, not once, not twice, but over and over while you were safe in your bed." Gasps rippled through the audience, phones lifted higher now, recording every word. The boy tried to muster courage, but his voice cracked. I was just joking. I didn't mean—" "Respect," the scarred Marine interrupted, his voice booming across the room. "That's not a joke. That's something you either have or you don't. And from where I'm standing, you don't." Daniel stepped closer to his father, his small frame trembling with mix of anger and pride. "My dad's a hero," he said, his voice breaking but loud enough for all to hear. "He's the reason I know what bravery looks like. He's the reason I'll never give up." Tears pricked Michael's eyes, but he blinked them back. His son's words hit harder than any bullet ever could. The Marine with the scar placed a firm hand on Michael's shoulder. "You don't have to defend yourself, brother. We'll do it for you." He turned back to the boy. "Do you even understand what it means to wear that uniform? Do you know the weight it carries?" He didn't wait for an answer. "It means standing between danger and the innocent. It means sacrificing sleep, safety, even your life, so kids like you can laugh without fear. And you dare mock that?" The boy's face turned red. His friends had already slipped back into the crowd, leaving him alone under the crushing gaze of men who had seen more in their lives than he could ever imagine. Then came a voice from the audience, an older woman, standing slowly, her hands trembling as she clutched a photo to her chest. "My son," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "My son wore that uniform. He never came home." She held up the picture for all to see, a young soldier smiling in fatigues. "Don't you dare disrespect what they've given us. Don't you dare." The boy's shoulders sagged. He lowered his gaze, unable to look anyone in the eye. The entire auditorium was silent now, the weight of her grief settling over them like a heavy blanket. Michael finally stepped forward, his voice quiet but commanding. "Son," he said to the boy, "you don't have to understand everything right now, but one day life will teach you the meaning of sacrifice. And when it does, I hope you remember this moment, not because you were humiliated, but because you were given a chance to learn." The boy nodded weakly, shame flooding his face. He stumbled backward into the crowd, desperate to disappear. Slowly the tension in the room began to ease. Parents whispered to their children, explaining the weight of what they had just witnessed. Students stared wide-eyed at Michael and his brothers, their expressions a mixture of awe and respect. The 6 Marines gathered closer around Michael, their laughter returning now that the storm had passed. "Still got it, huh?" One of them chuckled, clapping him on the back. "Didn't even have to raise your voice." Michael allowed himself a small smile. For years he had lived quietly, carrying his battles alone. But today, with his son watching and his brothers by his side, he realized something important. Silence had its place, but sometimes the truth needed to be spoken aloud. Daniel tugged at his sleeve. "Dad," he said softly, "I always knew you were strong, but today, I think everyone else finally saw it too." Michael kneeled down so he was eye level with his son. "Strength isn't about fighting, Daniel," he said gently. "It's about knowing when not to. It's about standing tall even when people don't understand you. And it's about never forgetting who you are, no matter what anyone says." Daniel nodded, his young face serious as if committing those words to memory forever. The ceremony slowly wound down, families heading out into the warm evening air. Michael and his brothers lingered, swapping stories, laughter echoing through the nearly empty auditorium. For the first time in a long time, Michael felt lighter, as though a weight had been lifted off his shoulders. As they walked out together side by side, Daniel looked up at his father with pride shining in his eyes. "Dad," he whispered, "you're my hero." And in that moment, surrounded by the brothers who had fought beside him and the son who would carry his legacy forward, Michael knew the truth. Respect wasn't demanded. It was earned. And today, in front of an entire community, he had reclaimed it, not just for himself, but for every soldier who had ever been forgotten. The boy who mocked him would move on, but the lesson would linger. The crowd would disperse, but the story would be retold. And Michael, he would continue living quietly, humbly, as he always had. But now there was no doubt. His son, his brothers, and everyone who had witnessed this day knew the truth. And that truth was simple. Honor doesn't fade. It lives on, in the sacrifices made, in the lives saved, and in the unshakable bond of those who understood what it meant to serve. The ceremony continued, but for Michael, the air in the auditorium felt heavier with each passing second. The laughter from those teenagers lingered, echoing in his memory louder than the applause for the graduates. He clenched his jaw and sat straighter, refusing to let them see how deeply their mockery cut. He had endured far worse: ambushes under foreign skies, the sting of shrapnel tearing through flesh, nights where the silence of the desert was broken only by the sound of distant gunfire. But this was different. This wasn't war. This was home. This was supposed to be safe. He glanced at Daniel, who sat back down proudly, his diploma clutched tightly in his hands. Michael softened at the sight. His son had no idea what had just happened, and Michael wanted to keep it that way. Daniel deserved this day without shadows, without the weight of his father's battles dragging him down. Yet the whispers didn't stop. A couple of rows back, the teenagers continued, nudging one another, chuckling under their breath. At first it was small, contained, but soon their remarks grew bolder. "Biddy thinks he's still a boot camp," one muttered. "Yeah, look at him, probably yelling at his kid at home too," another sneered. "I don't get why people still wear that stuff. What's he proving?" The words pricked Michael's ears like thorns. He took a slow breath, forcing his pulse back down. For years he had trained himself to control his reactions under fire. Surely he could do the same in a school auditorium. But discipline was harder when the battlefield wasn't in front of him, but behind him, etched into his bones. Then a voice cut deeper than the rest. "Honestly, who even cares about the military anymore? Just a bunch of guys playing soldier in someone else's country." The laughter from those teenagers hit Michael like a blow to the chest. His hands curled into fists in his lap, his nails digging into his palms. His mind flashed with images: the convoy ambushed in Kandahar, the orphans' children he had carried out of rubble, the folded flag he had presented to Jenkins' mother while she collapsed into sobs. Every insult hurled at him wasn't just about him. It was about every brother and sister who had given their lives in service, people who could no longer defend their own honor. Michael's breathing slowed, deepened.
He closed his eyes briefly, letting the voices fade. He had to hold on. This wasn't the place to explode. Grace's voice echoed in his head, as clear as if she were still sitting beside him. Show Daniel who you are, not who they think you are. And so he sat, silent, unmoving, until the last name was called and the graduates were officially declared alumni. The audience erupted in cheers. Students tossed their caps into the air, and the band struck up a triumphant song. Cameras flashed like fireworks. Parents rushed forward to hug their children, and the aisles filled with bodies moving in every direction. Michael stood slowly, adjusting his jacket. He spotted Daniel weaving through the crowd toward him, his face glowing with joy. "Dad!" Daniel called, holding up his diploma like a trophy. Pride surged through Michael's chest, momentarily washing away the sting of the insults. He wrapped his son in a firm embrace, holding him longer than usual. "I'm proud of you, son, more than you'll ever know." But before the moment could settle, a sharp voice broke in. "Hey, hero," one of the teenagers sneered, stepping into Michael's path. He was tall, with messy hair, and the kind of arrogance that came from never being told no. His friends trailed behind him, smirking like a pack of jackals circling their prey. "Nice costume. Bet you wear it to bed too, huh?" Daniel froze, looking between his father and the boy. Confusion clouded his expression. "Dad?" he asked quietly. Michael's eyes narrowed, his body going still in that eerie way only seasoned soldiers could. He didn't move forward, didn't lash out. Instead, his voice was calm, steady, but carried the weight of steel. "Watch your words, son." The teenager laughed, emboldened by his friends. "Come on, man, this isn't your rock. Nobody cares." Daniel's jaw tightened, anger flashing across his face. "Don't talk to him like that," he snapped, his voice louder than Michael had ever heard it. The boy scoffed. "What's he gonna do? Teach me how to march? Please." He stepped closer, close enough that Michael could smell the cheap cologne clinging to his shirt. "You don't know me. You don't know the men and women who wore this uniform before me. But one day, life will teach you the value of sacrifice. And when it does, you'll remember this moment." The boy scoffed, rolling his eyes, but his smirk wavered just slightly under the weight of Michael's gaze. His friends shifted uncomfortably, their confidence cracking. And then, before anyone could say more, a booming voice called out from the back of the auditorium. "Michael Grayson, is that you?" Michael turned, his heart jolting. 6 men were making their way through the crowd, their presence commanding attention even without uniforms. Broad-shouldered, weathered, moving with the unmistakable precision of soldiers who had seen combat together. They weren't just friends, they were brothers. Marines he hadn't seen in years, men he had bled beside in deserts and jungles, men he had thought he might never see again. The room seemed to shift as they approached, their voices booming with laughter, their eyes alight with recognition. "Look at you, still standing tall, still scaring kids half your age?" The teenagers who had mocked him paled instantly, their bravado draining as the 6 Marines clapped Michael on the back, surrounding him in a wall of camaraderie and unspoken respect. For the first time that day, Michael smiled, a real smile, one that reached his eyes. His brothers were here, and together they were about to remind everyone in that room what respect truly looked like.
The auditorium was buzzing with life, a sea of caps and gowns filling the stage as proud families crowded into the wooden bleachers. Streamers in the school's colors, navy blue and silver, hung from the ceiling, fluttering gently as the air conditioning hummed. Excitement clung to the air like static electricity. This was the day every student had been waiting for, the culmination of years of sleepless nights, homework, and exams. For many families, it was more than just a ceremony. It was the closing of one chapter and the beginning of another. Among the families shuffling to their seats was a tall, broad-shouldered man in his late 40s, his posture erect in a way that seemed natural rather than forced.
His uniform, though worn and pressed to perfection, drew quiet glances from those nearby. Rows of ribbons and medals lined his chest, each representing years of sacrifice, courage, and moments that could never truly be explained to anyone who hadn't lived them. His name was Michael Grayson, a retired Marine Corps officer who had spent more than 2 decades serving his country in some of the harshest conditions imaginable. But today wasn't about him. Today was about his son, Daniel, a lanky, bright-eyed young man about to graduate at the top of his class. Daniel had always admired his father's discipline, though he didn't fully understand the cost of the man's dedication until he was older. Michael had missed birthdays, anniversaries, and countless little moments, all in the name of duty. Yet he was here now, home, retired, and determined not to miss the milestones that mattered. Michael's eyes scanned the room, softening when they landed on his son sitting among his classmates in his cap and gown. A rare smile tugged at his lips. In Daniel, he saw a reflection of both himself and his late wife, Grace, who had passed away 5 years earlier after a battle with cancer. Grace had been the glue that held their world together, and her absence still lingered in their home like a shadow. Michael had promised her that no matter what, he would be there for Daniel, guiding him, supporting him, and never letting him feel alone. As the principal's voice boomed through the microphone, calling the ceremony to order, Michael sat back in his chair. Around him, families cheered, whispered, and adjusted their cameras. He noticed a few sidelong glances, people staring at his uniform. Some looked with quiet respect, others with curiosity, and a few with something colder, something Michael had grown accustomed to over the years. Not everyone admired soldiers. Not everyone understood them. Still, he paid it no mind. He had been through worse than sidelong stares. He had learned long ago that dignity didn't come from applause, it came from within. The first names were called. One by one, students walked across the stage, shook hands with the principal, and received their diplomas. Proud parents clapped and shouted their children's names. Michael joined in, his hands strong and steady, his heart swelling each time Daniel's classmates crossed the stage. But beneath his calm demeanor, a storm brewed. Memories he kept locked away began to stir. Because for Michael, ceremonies like this weren't just about celebration. They reminded him of the ceremonies he'd attended overseas. Farewells, memorials, folded flags handed to grieving families. He remembered standing in desert heat as taps played, his uniform heavy with sweat and grief. He remembered holding back tears as friends he'd laughed with hours before were lowered into the ground. To the world, those moments were invisible, but for Michael, they lived in every breath, every step, every quiet second when the world seemed too still. A voice jolted him back to the present. "Excuse me," someone whispered beside him. Michael turned to see a man in a crisp suit, his expression polite, but tinged with something less friendly. "Do you mind sitting a little further back? Your uniform is distracting." Michael blinked, taken aback. "Distracting?" he repeated, his voice calm. The man gave a thin smile. "It's a graduation, not a military parade. Some of us think the attention should be on the kids, not on medals." His eyes flicked dismissively to Michael's chest. For a moment, Michael said nothing. His instinct was to respond sharply, but years of discipline kept his tone measured. "The attention is on the kids, on my son. That's why I'm here." The man huffed, as though unsatisfied, and turned back towards the stage. Michael's jaw tightened, but he forced himself to focus on Daniel. He wouldn't let one man's ignorance sour the day. Minutes passed, more students were called, the applause grew louder, the air warmer, and the anticipation thicker. Michael's hands clasped together, his knuckles white. His heart thudded louder now, not from nerves, but from a gnawing sense that the moment he had longed for, Daniel's walk across that stage, would not come easily. And he was right.
When Daniel's name was finally called, Michael leapt to his feet, clapping and whistling, his proud cheers echoing through the auditorium. Daniel stepped forward, his smile wide, his posture confident. But just as Michael's joy peaked, a voice rang out from behind him. Of course, the loudest one would be the guy in uniform, a teenager muttered, loud enough for those around to hear. Laughter followed. Michael froze. His smile faltered, his applause slowing. He turned slightly, catching the smirk of a boy a few rows back, surrounded by friends who looked equally amused. Michael's chest tightened, not with anger, but with something heavier, disappointment. He had worn this uniform for years, bled for it, buried brothers under its flag, and yet here he was, mocked in a high school auditorium for showing pride in his son. Daniel, still on the stage, hadn't noticed. He accepted his diploma, shaking the principal's hand with the same quiet dignity Michael had tried to teach him. The audience clapped, the ceremony continued, but for Michael, the moment was fractured. The laughter lingered in his ears, sharp as gunfire. He sat down slowly, his shoulders rigid. He didn't lash out. He didn't defend himself. He had learned long ago that silence could be more powerful than any words. But deep down, a question gnawed at him. How many people here saw him the way those boys did? How many dismissed his sacrifices as nothing more than an outdated costume, a relic from wars they didn't care to understand? Michael's mind drifted, unbeknownst, to his last deployment, Afghanistan, 2012. He remembered a boy not much older than Daniel, Private Jenkins, barely 19 years old, who had cracked jokes to keep the squad's spirits high. Jenkins never made it home. Michael had carried his body to the medevac helicopter himself, his uniform soaked with dust and blood. He remembered the look in Jenkins' eyes in those final moments, the trust, the fear, the weight of a life cut too short. Now in this auditorium, as strangers whispered and laughed, Michael felt that same heaviness pressing on his chest. But instead of grief, it was something else. Resolve. Because Michael knew something these people didn't. He knew that respect wasn't given by titles or uniforms or medals. It was earned. And sometimes it had to be taught. As Daniel returned to his seat, Michael straightened in his chair. The storm inside him was no longer quiet. It was building, waiting for the moment it would break. And when it did, everyone in that room would learn a lesson they would never forget.